Good evening, everyone. Tonight's shiur Elul Nishmat Avimori Dober Meir Nun Halevi Mimrati Rochel Bad Harav Michael. And this Shabbos, we have the privilege of reading parshat Ki Taytzay, which is a parsha that's full of mitzvot. As I said, more mitzvot in this week's parsha than any other single parsha. As a matter of fact, it has more than 10% of all the mitzvot of the Torah are in this week's parsha, 74 to be exact, at least according to the counters of mitzvot. And we're going to focus on one very, very small mitzvah that really, I think, gives us a very, very powerful lesson of that we are to show proper respect, human dignity to others. That's really the focus of tonight's shiur, and it's, as I said, based on two short psukim in the parsha. Parak Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Bet, and Chaf Gimel tells us it's in a very interesting context that we have this mitzvah, but we're going to talk about it a little bit as we go further. So the pasuk tells us, if a person what's the word I'm trying to think of, is convicted of a capital crime and he is executed, Vitalito to al eitz, he should then, after the execution, he has to be hanged on a tree. However, lo tali nivlato al ha'etz, he is not to be left overnight hanging on this tree. Ki kavartik berenu bayomo, he must be buried on that very same day. Ki kilalat Elohim talui, because it is a klala for Elohim that he is hanging. V'lo tetameet admatcha, and he should not, you shall not bring impurity to your land. Hashem is giving you as an inheritance. Now, this pasuk really is the source for a lot of the halacha that relates to burial. The fact that the Torah wants us to bury people in an expeditiously as possible manner without stamping and trampling on their dignity. That's the mitzvah that we're going to talk about, and we're going to see where that gets developed from and how it works. So we'll start as usual with Rashi. Rashi focuses on the concept again of we're not allowed to let this person's body stay hanging from a tree because it is kilalat Elokim. Now, there are two different ways that Rashi is going to look at kilalat Elokim, or one is going to look at Elohim meaning God, the other is going to look at Elohim meaning the judges who have judged this man's case. So remember, we're talking about here a convicted person who has been convicted of a capital crime that and has been executed. So Rashi says, why is it kilalat Elokim talui zilzulo shel melechu? It is an embarrassment to the king. She'adam, that a person, asui b'dmut yukno, that man is created somehow in God's form, in God's image, somehow resembles God. The Yisrael hein banav, and we the Jewish people are his children. And for a person who is a child of God to be seen hanging on a tree after he has been executed does not give respect to the Almighty. Mashal, Rashi quotes from the Gemara, which we'll see later on. I think I brought that down later on as a source. Lishnei achim talmim, to two twin brothers. Shayudon zelaz, obviously they were identical twins. Echad nasa melech, one became the king. The echad nitpas l'listiot v'nitleh, and the other is executed as a criminal. He's got into a criminal element and ended up getting hanged. Kol haroa oto, whoever sees this identical twin of the king hanging, Omer hamelech talui, is going to say the king has been hanged. So this is not appropriate for the king HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that a person who is created in his image should be hanging from a tree. Kol klala shebemikra, and Rashi adds, every time we have this word kilala in scripture, lashon hakel, hekel v'zilzul, it is a language of degradation and lowering of somebody. As David says about Shimon ben Gera, that he cursed me with a terrible curse that lowered my stature. It was not appropriate. So again, this concept of klala being something that lowers us in the eyes of others. Rashbam, Kikilalat Elokim Talui. Again, he's going to focus on what does this verse mean? Again, he's going to go in the other direction. Rashi, as I said, focused on Kilat Elohim Talui, referring to God, that Elohim is God. Rashbam is going to start with the Elohim referring to the judges. Kisharoim b'nei Adam et hatalui, when people see that a person has been hanged by a court, regilim lekalel et hadayanim, they will curse the judges. They will lower in their esteem. They will lower their perception of the judges. Who? Oh, krovim shel harog, either the relatives of the person who was executed, shar b'nei adam, or other people who see and hear the whole story of how this person was executed, related to them, will also the judges, their perception of the judges will be lowered. Because there are times when it seems that he was executed for a seemingly insignificant crime. For example, the person who in the desert all he was gathering trees. It seems like a very trivial thing to be doing, and yet he was executed. So we know that there are many things that might appear to be trivial when it comes to capital crimes, yet the fact that a person was executed, people will say, the court made a mistake. It doesn't make sense. The Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem has told us elsewhere in the Torah, Amar Elohim lo tekalel, we are not to curse judges when they are executing judgment and justice to the best of their ability based on the evidence presented and the cross-examination of the witness presented. That is their job. Why does God have to tell us not to curse the judges? That people are it's very common that people will say that the judges made a mistake, and they will blame the judges for this perversion of justice. The lakach lotalim nivlatal. Therefore, once he has been hanged, we do not leave him hanging on the tree for an extended period of time. Elakavar tik bareno, bayoma, we should be immediately buried, so that people will not have the opportunity to see him for any length of time. The otam acher b'davar, and another reason that the pasuk gives why we should not allow him and leave him hanging on the tree, shelo titameet admatcha, that he should not defile the land, because we know that a corpse spreads tum'ah, that ritual impurity, by his presence. If he is not get buried properly in a place that's clearly marked where he's buried, Yitamu bo nogea o ma'ahil, a person who comes in his proximity and touches him or passes under him will become ritually impure. So again, the Rashbam goes the exact opposite direction as Rashi. He says Elohim is referring to the judges, whereas Rashi says Kilat Elohim is referring to God. So we have two different ways of interpreting the verse. Chorshor is going to kind of synthesize the two. Kilat Elohim talui. What does Kilas Elohim talui means? Ki al kilat Elohim adam talui. The reason the pasuk, the Gemara explains that not every capital crime is the person who is executed ultimately hanged. It is only for a specific set of crimes, a very, very small set of crimes. One who blasphemes the name of God and one who worships idols, is what the halacha tells us. Those are the only two capital punishments for which one is executed and hanged. All other executions are executed, and that is it. So, Kikalat Elohim Adam Talui, Shari Migadef Niskal Vinitla, because who is it who gets a double punishment of being being punished through being executed, and also gets hanged is a megadef, somebody who blasphemes the name of God. V'zeu netinat tam. So this kilalat Elohim is explaining the reason for lo talin, why we should not allow him to stay hanging. Lefi, because shederach megadef liot nitla, the ordinary course of events is somebody who was hanged was somebody who blasphemed the name of God. Ani omer lecha, so I'm telling you, lo nitla, lo talin shum nitla, because of the fact that somebody who blasphemes is hanged. Therefore, anybody who is hanged has to be removed shortly, virtually immediately after they are hanged. They are removed and buried. Shema yomru haroim, because people who see a person who has been hanged will say, Zemigadefaya, he was a blasphemer. Veherimiyad b'melech. And once they have to relate the blasphemy that he rebelled against the king, Zeganai lamelech. It's not appropriate to the king, God, that people should be treating God such. And this is an embarrassment for the king that people have stooped to such a level in their relationship with God. Now, Khoshar gives a slightly different twist and gives a different mashal. He gives the following mashal. He gives an example of the Adam Shipavis Atarat Hamelech al Panav. Person came, stepped up to the king and slapped him on his face. The Talash Saro Zakano, or he tore out his hair or his beard. Even though the king now then gives him his punishment and hanged him, it's still it's an embarrassment to the king. That when people see him hanging and they say, well, why was he hanged? Then they'll have to tell the whole story of how he completely embarrassed the king. That's not appropriate. And therefore, you should not leave him hanging for an extended period of time. It is a very brief period. He is hanged for to fulfill the commandment, and zehu, that's it. So that's one interpretation, which we saw above, a version of that with Rashbam. Now he goes to the other side. Kikilat Elohim. The other verse is Kikilat Elohim is referring to the judges. Kisharoy Madam Talui, when we see a person who has been hanged, Mekalima Dayanim Shadanuhu, the people will tend to curse the judges who judged him. Lakach, therefore, lefi shemerachamim al ha'ani hanitleh ubayim lidei yisur, since they have people passing by, will have mercy on the person who was hanged and will cause, and through that they will curse the judges. They will come to sin. We don't want his corpse hanging from a tree to be an impediment to people, to cause people to sin by cursing the judges. Virabotenu darshu, and Chazal explained, Ki kalat Elohim kal let bishash adam mitztayer. It means a kal means he was lowered. When a person is in trouble, he is lowered. Or mutal bebizayon, or he is left in a position of embarrassment. Shechina omeret. What does the God say when God is upset? He says, I am lowered when I see people in trouble or in an embarrassing situation. Shechina omeret kivyachol. It's as if God says, Kalani meroshai, my head has been lowered. My feeling of my head is my how I feel in my head has been lowered. Kalani mizroi, I have been lowered through my feeling in my bones. Vim omer kain al rishaim. Now, if God says, I feel bad because of the wicked person who is hanging, al tzadikim lo kolshkein, how much more so does God feel disappointed, upset, lowered when righteous people are mistreated? So if you see that, just for the fact that an evil person, somebody who had to be executed, was hanged, how much more so for the righteous? And therefore it says, and continues, the pasuk continues, lo tameat admatcha, tam acher, another reason why we should not allow a person to stay hanged, klomar lachach lo talin, the reason we should not allow his body to stay hanging in public, sh'adam meit mitame anogeh bo v'mayil tachtav, as we saw above in the Rashbam, that when a corpse is hanging, anybody who comes in contact with that corpse or passes underneath it becomes tameh. The nimtzu no say taharat livnei adam taharim mitamim. So what happens is people who are passing by and trying to retain their purity, or they're carrying pure foodstuffs, will become tameh. So again, One of the reasons Chizkuni wants to say is that we should not be, this corpse should not be a stumbling block for other people who are passing by. Chizkuni. Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz. He should not, again, he must be buried on the same day shenitla that he is hanged. Shelo yomru haroim, so that people passing by should not say, Dino shomegadef bitliya, that since we know that a person who blasphemes is hanged, Shema zemegadef hayan, perhaps this one was a blasphemer, to relate that a person has blasphemed the king is an embarrassment to the king. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, as we've seen, Kikilat Elohim Talui, Yomru, people will say, Im Hakal b'mitzvot Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kavar Natal b'mita et Shalo. In other words, this person who treated God's commandments lightly and has already been punished through his death, it should be enough that he was hanged, so we should forgive him. That's what it means, kikilat. He was lowered already, so it's enough. By him being hanged, it's enough. Once he's been hanged, it's already enough of an embarrassment for the person who sinned that he should not be left there for an extended period of time. That's another way of looking at this. Davar acher, another interpretation. It's referring to the judges who would be embarrassed by him hanging there. If this corpse is going to stay on the tree, and those that pass by Yeruhu, Bal Partzuf, Vikoma, they will see that they'll see him as a normal person. And they will think that he was improperly judged for something that really should not have warranted such a terrible punishment. And they will again curse the judges who judged him to be hanged. As we saw before, we want to bury him so that he doesn't cause spread ritual impurity. That Hashem gives us as an inheritance to teach us that din is that this law that when a person is hanged, he immediately should be buried. It's only knowing in the land of Eretz of Yisrael. This is not something that we carry out outside of the land of Eretz Yisrael, primarily because it is only primarily in Eretz Yisrael that we are primarily concerned with pure ritual impurity of Tuma and Tara. Okay. Al-Shich. Al-Shich says the following. First he quotes the Pasuk, Yomar, to teach us. He's saying, first it starts out a person just simply does a chet. Because we know that in general, the word chet refers to an inadvertent sin rather than something that is advertent. However, we also know that an inadvertent sin can never carry a capital punishment, never carry a death sentence. However, what he's saying, Hashem says, first he will start with a chet. And from there he will be drawn. Once he has done something inappropriate, he will, if he isn't careful, he will be drawn again after Achasoto until he will do something. He will eventually transgress a sin that causes him to be judged with death. As then, Bal Tachshov Shaniskal Bavono, who can nerag al Yidei HaMelech al Avero. We shouldn't think that a person who was punished with stoning through his sin, it's as if he's already been killed, he's been executed by the king. Ritzona umitzvato, and we have carried out a king's commandment, Shulihina came over Ritzono, that the purpose of this punishment is to take revenge against the person who has gone against his will. However, he does not raise any decay or stain on the soul of the person who has transgressed. So we would have thought that now he's already cleansed himself by being executed. It's not the way it works when we transgress Hashem's will. That through this sin, he has left a permanent stain on his soul and his existence, his being has been stained through this sin. Vizel, and this is what the pasuk means: Ki yevi ish chet, that a person starts out with a sin. Shechet hu beish atzmo, that we shouldn't think that it's just a person sinned and the sin is something that's separate from the person. The person who has sinned is now tied to the sin until he can cleanse himself. That we shouldn't think that, all he has to do now is go back and do the ordinary mitzvot. But no, it's now that he has corrupted himself, he has to first cleanse himself. And the fact that he will die, we might have thought that the execution is again to fix himself and to remove the chet. That through this he will cleanse himself of this impurity that's gripped his soul because of his sin. And that's what the pasuk means when it says the ish in the person is mishpat mavet. He himself within him is this judgment that he has to be executed. However, we might have thought after his case has been carried out, that through his being stoned and being punished with death, God has forgiven him his sin. Now he has been cleansed from sin. But now when we hang him, we are hanging somebody who is in the image of God. The kilkalo, the shchito ba'avono shavanitkan. That he corrupted his body, his image of God, through his sin has now been fixed. Then it's only after he has been executed and now he is able to restore his tzelem Elokim. Vitalito oto al eitz. We have to hang him on a tree. Why? Very interesting reason is given by Al-Shich. Lirmos to hint kishav el eitz hachayim achar ansho. After he's been punished, he returns to the tree of life. He returns to his ability to connect back to the Torah and back to the Jewish people. Kishav shuv tzelem Elokim al panav, because now again the image of God has returned to him through being punished by being executed. So Al-Shich takes a completely different perspective on why he is being hanged. He's being hanged to publicize the fact that he has now been he has been punished. His punishment has been carried out. He's now been cleansed of this sin that he had to do, that required this punishment. The Al-Kain, and therefore, continues the Al-Shich, therefore, since he has now been cleansed and he has been returned to Tzelem Elokim, therefore, lo toliniv la to'ala eitz, we cannot allow him to remain hanging from the tree, because now he has restored his Tzelem Elokim. And that is what the Gemara means. He says, the Gemara that said that the mashal that we quoted above of the two twin brothers that appear alike, and it is a bizayon when people think that the king is hanging, but it's now that he has been restored to his prominent place of Tzelem Elokim, of being a human being again, we don't want him to hang. To teach us ki nitkan pigam tzelem Elokim asher shichet zot likono yitaches. That this is to teach us the fact that he's not and is now immediately buried after being hanged is to teach us that this shortcoming that he has created in his humanity, in his tzelem Elokim, in his image of God, that he destroyed, has now been fixed. He's now been returned to the concept of Tzelem Elokim, and that is why he requires burial, because he is no longer treated as somebody who has transgressed. He has paid for his crime or received his punishment for his crime with his death, and now he can be restored to his humanity. Aderet Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon says the following: Lo talin. Again, the concept of lo talin is hu lo taseh. This is a negative commandment. By allowing a person not to be buried, we are transgressing a negative commandment. That we should bury him on the same day as mitzvah aseh. This is a positive commandment. So in this one pasuk, we have a negative commandment and a positive commandment that both can be fulfilled together, but they are part and parcel of two different mitzvot, not the same mitzvah. Kavor tikberenu. Now, the Vilna Gaon goes a step further. It doesn't just say ki kavor that you should bury him. It uses this double language. Bury, you shall bury him on that day. What does that mean? L'rabot kol hametim likfura. This is to teach us that every corpse has to be buried. Bayom hahu, on that day. Now, the way this is phrased is he is supposed to be immediately buried on the same day that the execution takes place. He is hanged, and then he's immediately removed from the tree and buried. Yachol afilu lichodo. Now, again, the Vilna Gaon is saying that this concept of burial on the same day applies to everyone. Why? When does it not apply? Yachol afilu lichodo. I might think that we should, even if we are delaying for the honor of the person being buried, that we should not allow a delay. Talmud lomar al ha'etz. Ma she'eno lechavod. Only if it's not for his honor. In other words, if it's something that is for his honor, we can hold off the burial. Kikilat Elokim talui, because again the pasuk continues. Elohim hu laflik adavar kimo harari el shal hevet ya. God will decide what's going on. L'chein kan perusho bizayon gadol muflad ma'od. It is a great visible embarrassment. This is the embarrassment of being hanged. That klala is the language of bizayon. So by him hanging, and he's again in the image of God, that's considered a great embarrassment to God. What is admatcha referring to? You shouldn't profane the land that you're living on. Hu beit hamikdash. It's referring to the altar in the Beit HaMikdash when it says Lo tameat admatcha. You should not defile your land, your ground, your earth, and that's referring to the earth in the Beit HaMikdash of the altar which is built out of adama, which is built out of earth. Therefore, it says Lo tameat admatcha instead of Lo tameat artzacha, your land. It says your earth. Shemisham, why does it refer to the earth of the Beit HaMikdash? Shemisham nivra Adam HaRishon nimkom HaMizbeach. The place where the altar was located in the Beit HaMikdash was the area where the earth was taken to create Adam HaRishon. So when we defile our humanity, we are defiling the place of our creation. That Hashem is giving us includes all of Eretz Yisrael, and Nachla, L'Nachla's inheritance of Yerushalayim refers to Yerushalayim. So again, the whole pasuk tells us that not only are we defiling the location where he's being hanged, we're defiling Eretz Yisrael, the Beit HaMikdash, also by leaving him hanging when he is created out of the Adamah, where the Beit HaMikdash is located. Interesting perspective. Now, the Gemara takes this pasuk, and as the Vilna Gaon, as we saw already, extends the meaning of this pasuk. So first, we have a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that tells us the following: Umatirin oto miyad. Again, the previous part of the Mishnah talks about after he's been executed, he is hanged. And immediately after being hanged, he is removed, he is untied. In other words, it's the halacha seems to imply that the one person would hang him on the tree, and immediately after there'd be another person taking him down to bury him. The imulan, and if the Gemara, now this is the Gemara adds, if he is left on the tree overnight, over Allah lotaseh, whoever, somehow somebody has transgressed a negative commandment. Shenever, as the pasuk says, Lo tolniv lo toal ha'etz ki kavar tik berenu. He is not allowed to be left on the tree. He must be buried. Ki kilat Elohim talui Kilomar. Now, what does this pasuk come to tell us? The Gemara wants to teach us. Why was this one deserving of being hanged? Which literally means he blessed the name, but that is a euphemism that the Gemara always refers to blasphemy by the term of blessing the name of God, because it doesn't want to say that chas v'shalom somebody blasphemed. The nimtza shem shamayim mitchalal, and through the fact that he blasphemed the name of God, the name of God is profane. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, when a person is in trouble, Shechina ma lashon ameret. What does the Shechina say? Kalani me roshi, kalani mizroai. I am lowered because a person is in dire straits. In kain amakom mitztaer al daman shel rishoyim shenishpachet. If the God feels such pain when the evil, wicked people their blood is spilled, in other words, they are executed, kal v'chomer al daman shel tzadikim, how much more so when the righteous die, when their blood is spilled. The lows will be ilvad omer. Now, this is the case where I want to go through. Now, the Mishnah ends with the following statement. Not only is the person who is executed and then hanged have to be buried immediately, Ella, the Gemara now expands this halacha to everybody. Kol hamalinet meito over below ta'aseh. Anyone who allows his a dead body of his, in other words, a close relative who he's responsible for burying, to be left overnight, has transgressed the negative commandment of burial on that, of don't allow a person not to be buried. However, the Mishnah then qualifies it. The Gemara then qualifies it. Hilanu lichvodo, if the reason that the burial was delayed was in order to give proper honor to the person who has passed away. Examples the Gemara now gives: L'havilo aron v'tachrichin, to bring him a proper casket or a proper burial shroud. Eino over alav, does not transgress this negative commandment of not allowing him to be buried. So it's only when we do not allow him to be buried and there's absolutely no reason to postpone the burial. The Gemara then continues to explain this statement. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan said the name Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Minayin, from where do we learn lemalinet mito, to somebody who allows his burial, his dead to stay overnight? She'over alav lo tasi, transgresses a negative commandment. Talmud Lomar, the verse tells us, Ki kavar tik berenu, bury, you shall bury him. Mikan, from here, lemalinet meto, from here we understand that one who allows his dead to sit overnight without being buried, she'over below taseh, transgresses a negative commandment. However, that's one version of what the statement was. Ika d'amri, others say there's a different version of what this statement was. He says the following. Not that we're over below taseh. He says, where does the Torah give us a hint that we are supposed to bury people? Where does the Torah hint to that? Which, by the way, the Gemara later on asks, seems to be a very strange question, because we have numerous cases in the Torah of burial, whether it's Avram and burying Sarah, whether it's Yaakov requesting the Yosef that he bury him, etc., etc. There are no shortage of cases. However, that's what the Rabbi Yochanan wants to say. This verse is the proof for why we are supposed to bury people. Amalei, the Gemara brings a very, very strange case. Amalei Shvor Malka Rabbi Chama, Shvor Malka, Shvor the king, some non-Jewish Persian king, says to Rabbi Chama, Kavur mina Torah minayin, where does the Torah teach us that we're supposed to be buried? Ishtik v'lo amalei v'lomidei. He was silent and did not offer an answer. Amar Racha Yaakov, when Racha Yaakov heard this story, Imsar alba b'yidat t'kshay. He says God has given over the world into people who are foolish. You should have said our pasuk ki kavar, that our pasuk says you must bury him, which means which means that in a place where burial is generally done by custom, in a coffin you have to provide a coffin for him. So the Gemara answers, well, you know why he didn't answer that? Because Tikbarena lo mashmalei. The fact that you bury someone doesn't prove that that it's required. It just says you're allowed to bury him. The Nema ikbar tzadiki. Again, why didn't he say, wait a minute, we have all these righteous people who are buried? And he said, why didn't he answer the king that? In Hagabi Alma, the king would have said that was just the local custom. Why didn't he answer me to Kavre HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe? Wait a minute. The Torah specifically says that when Moshe dies, God buries Moshe. Why didn't Rav Chama answer the king that? So the Gemara again pushes that off. God only buried him because that was the normal custom. And then again, he goes through more cases of buries, and all of them, the Gemara answers the same thing. They did not want to say, he didn't want to bring that as an absolute proof because it just says, that was the normal custom. It's not an absolute ironclad proof because we see so many people getting buried. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan had to bring this first, that he should be buried, as a proof rather than all these historical cases of people being buried. I thought that's a very interesting way the Gemara looks at it. Now, Rambam thinks this halacha is so important, by the way, that he brings it down in two different sources. In the Yad HaChazakah, in Rambam's Code of Law, this law is brought down twice, and I bring them side by side. The first one is in the laws of Sanhedrin and the laws of Judges. Second one is in the place of Avelut, the laws of mourning. So Rambam in Halachot of Sanhedrin says the following: it is a positive commandment to bury anyone who is executed by a court on the day of the execution. And he brings the verse that we've been discussing. He must be buried on that day. And then he continues, and not only those that are executed by a court, anyone who leaves a person who has died, a relative who has died overnight, over Allah below Tas, has transgressed this negative commandment. However, the Rambam then adds, if the reason that he delayed the burial was for the honor of the dead person, or to bring him a coffin, or to bring him shrouds, he does not transgress this commandment for that. Now, by the way, similarly, in Hilchot Evel, Rambam adds a little bit more. He says, Haya Erev Shabbat or Erev Yom Tov. If it was Erev Shabbat, it was Friday afternoon, or it was Erev Yom Tov, it was the day before Chag, or there was rain dripping on the coffin, on the coffin or the shroud of the person, the dead body. Mutar, then it is permissible to expedite the burial. Shalomir, because he hasn't expedited the burial, to give extra honor to his parents, that they shouldn't be disgraced by the rain ruining, getting their body wet, or by the fact that it was Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov. He did not want them to have to sit unburied for the whole Shabbos or the whole Yom Tov. So he is rushing the burial to conclude it before Shabbos or Yom Tov begins. However, in every other case, everyone else who, again, leaves his dead person unburied overnight has transgressed, for his honor or to fulfill some other need that is to give honor to the necessity of the funeral. That's for the funeral itself. So again, Rambam very clearly in both places tells us burial in Jewish tradition is to be expedited, but not to the extent of expediting such that we dishonor the person. That's the key. The key here is giving the dead person the proper honor that they deserve, the proper respect that they deserve, without rushing and yet without delaying extensively for no reason whatsoever. Then we get to the Shulchan Aruch. The Torah writes the following to codify this law. Asur lahalin hamet, it is forbidden to leave a dead person unburied. The ima may lino lichvodo. However, if he is being left over, if he is left unburied to give honor to the dead, lahavilo aron detachbichin, to bring either a coffin or to bring shrouds, umekonenot, or even to bring professional mourners, so that again that the mourning will be felt. Mutar, all of that is permitted. Tanya, we learned a Braita called Amadcha Mitato. Now, anybody who pushes off the burial of his parents, Hareza Mishubach, is praiseworthy. Perish, what does that mean? Shemimaher Lotzio. Okay, that again, when we try to expedite a burial, is to be praised. And it means again, what is means that he's memaher lotzio. He's expediting a funeral. He's expediting the burial. That's praiseworthy. However, al avi v'ima, but if it's his parents, if he is expediting it or he's rushing it, and it's his parents, then it's not appropriate. So when it comes to your parents, you are not supposed to rush the funeral. You are supposed to do it in an appropriate time frame, but not to the extent that it feels rushed. However, Haya Erev Shabbos or Erev Yontif, if it is Friday afternoon or it's an Erev Chag, or it's raining and the body is going to get disgraced, then it's okay to speed up and expedite the funeral because he's only doing it for the honor of his parents, not because he's in a rush and wants to get it over with and done, but because he's doing it to honor his parents. In reality, what this pasuk is saying is that when a person, when you're burying your parents, you should not rush. You should take the time to reflect, to make sure that they are properly eulogized. And the same thing with every funeral, that we are supposed to ensure that there's appropriate eulogies. However, we also have to keep track that if it's a Friday afternoon, that we don't go into the Shabbat and we allow people who are living to get home and time for Shabbat and prepare for Shabbat. Shulchan Aruch then comes and codifies very, very similarly the following thing. Also, lahalin and hamed, again, it's forbidden to allow a person to be unburied. Ella imkain hilanu lichvodo. Same thing we've seen before. When we are allowing him to remain unburied, only to give extra honor during the burial. What are the examples? Now, the reason I brought the Shulchan Aruch is to give some other examples. Lavilo aron metafrichin o mekonot. We've seen already, to bring a coffin, to bring shrouds and proper mourners. That's okay. Oh, or he adds another. Kadesh Yavo Krovim, in order that his relatives should be able to come from, I guess that's the extended relatives who might not live in proximity. Oh, Lashmi Ayarot, or even so that the word can spread to the surrounding cities that so and so has died, to bring extra people, to bring more people, so that it again should give extra honor to the person who has passed away. So we see very much that from the halachic perspective that is developed based on this pasuk, which again, remember, started with a convicted criminal, somebody who's convicted of a capital crime, who has been executed, who has to be immediately buried. The Torah and the Gemara wants to extend this to everybody, that everybody should be given a proper burial in a way that is expeditious as possible, but on the same hand, not so expeditiously that we do not allow the family to participate, we do not allow the person to be eulogized properly. And all of these is really to show us the importance of this concept of Tselem Elokim, that even though the body is the house for the neshama, because it is the housing for the neshama, it has a special place in our approach to life, because again, we are Tselem Elokim, we are created in this image of God that stays with us even after death. The corpse even retains this concept of Tselem Elokim even after death, and therefore we have to accord proper respect to it, because by giving respect to this dead body and burying it properly and appropriately, we are giving respect, A, to the soul that it housed, but B, even more so, we're giving respect to its creator, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think it's a very, very powerful lesson that we learn, as I said, one short pasuk in the Torah that gives us a very, very powerful lesson. And if that is the kavod and the honor we're supposed to give to the body after death, how much more so should we be giving proper respect to every individual that we interact with, that we happen to meet and come into contact with in the course of our lives on our way, that we should have the same respect for them that we have for the dead as we go through life. And through that, we can come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And especially as we go, as I said, it's the month of Elul, we're getting closer to the Yom Noraim. We should be thinking about not just our calculations and our cheshbonot with Hashem, but how we treat other people. That's a critical component, should be a critical component of our annual spiritual accounting that we are doing during this time of year. And we hope and pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hear our tefillot and bless us with a happy and a healthy year as we go forward. I open up now for questions, comments, and feedback.
Aaron, I have a question. You keep
Okay.
saying that executed and then hung. How was he executed, or she?
In general, this particular, again, being that the halacha tells us that the executions were for blasphemy and for idolatry. Those were the only ones. There were 4 different modes of execution that the Gemara talks about.
One was stoning.
Okay, one is stoning, but it's not what we think of stoning. It's basically, as I said, the Gemara has a whole description of the procedure. There was stoning, sreifa, burning, but it's not burning at a stake the way we picture it.
No,
it was burning you insidely by forcing you to swallow molten lead, basically, to burn your innards, not burning at a stake.
Okay. Not to burn your body. Okay.
The third is strangulation, which is basically they just, again, strangled you. The fourth is decapitation. Okay. Sayif, through cutting your head off, basically. Okay. Now, again, each of those have different crimes for which different averot for which they are carried out. But again, according to halacha, which is the accepted halacha, is that the only 2 crimes for which you are executed first and then hanged after you've been executed, not by hanging.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay?
Right.
It's never execution by hanging. It's being hanged as a corpse after the execution, and that is for blasphemy and for idolatry. Those are the 2 for which and both of those carry the punishment, the penalty of stoning. Okay? Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. If not, I wish you all a rest of the